Okay, so our panelists today.
I cheat.
Here's why we close it up if you want. I'll need to, if I can go in order here, is Lori Skye, who works in, that's why I'm trying to go from the end. So, and I don't have an elaborate introduction for all the people here. And tell me if I'm wrong here. I think what I'm going to do is actually, I'm not going to read all the introductions. I'll let you introduce yourself to some extent. But Lori Skye works at Essential Health.
Yes.
And also is representing organized labor this evening in the form of, you work with U.S. Steelworkers Local 96-460, right? Okay. And then there's Alan Bramley, who works at Omer Nelson Electric. And I will let you introduce yourself a little bit more. You can say the same things I was going to say. I think that'd be fine. I can go ahead and do that. Okay. Alan was raised in Ashland. I tweaked this anyhow because I got to know Alan recently. Oh, yes.
We can't hear you.
Okay, Alan. Okay, Alan was raised in Ashland. He graduated from Ashland High School. He was married to Alan Nelson's daughter, and now is part of that long-standing local family-owned business where he is committed to providing excellent products and services complemented by the goal of treating employees with respect and fairness. While Omer Nelson Electric is known as a family business, Alan sees the business as a team effort among all employees. He is committed to staying in the region with his family, including his 7-month-old child. He also represents the business community where he maintains a strong interest in economic growth and job creation to stop the brain drain of young people leaving their family and community to seek employment elsewhere. Then there's Mari K. Napozny with the Northwest Wisconsin Workforce Development Board. Mari is the Chief Executive Officer of the Northwest Wisconsin Workforce Investment Board, or Northwest WIP. Can you say that all in one word? WIP. Okay. That oversees the Federal Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act activities for the 10 counties of Northwest Wisconsin. She served 2 terms on the Wisconsin Economic Development Association's Board of Directors and currently serves as a board member of the Visions Northwest Regional Economic Development Organization. Mari completed her undergraduate work at Northland College and has a Master of Education degree from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. She has over 16 years of experience working in workforce and economic development in Wisconsin. She also is a small business owner who operates Ignite Fitness Studio in downtown Ashland. Chas Connors is a planner from the Bad River Tribe of the Lake Superior Ojibwe. The last 4 years, he's been working as a grant writer at Bad River. He has a bachelor's degree in business management and leadership from Northland College and an associate's degree in computer networking and business administration from LCO Community College. Prior to his current position, he also worked 5 years as shift supervisor at the Bad River Casino and 9 years working as a table games manager also at the casino. And there's Cam Wilcox. He was a student. Are you still a student at WITC? He's doing so many other things, and so Cam is actually a cross-country skier. Oh, excuse me, no, that's where I first know him. He lives in Shawinigan Bay Area for most of his life. He started his own lawn care business, and when he was about 11 years old, and it's been growing the business ever since. He also worked full-time as a Washburn IGA now for 10 years and has served as the evening store manager for the past 2.5 years. In his spare time, I'm not sure what spare time is, over the past several years, he's been working towards an associate degree in business management here at WITC Ashland. So this is our panel, and the idea is we have about 5-ish minutes to give your perspective in response to Laura's presentation and bring in your story and how you see it in your response to Laura, excuse me. And since I didn't really introduce you very well, Lori, if you want to start and you can introduce yourself and then everyone else will have a chance to do that, okay?
Sure. Thank you. Okay, so my name is Lori Skye. Jan asked me to be on this panel. Jan and I have worked together for many years at Essential Health. I think part of the reason Jan asked me was because I kind of represent several different aspects. I grew up here. I've lived here my entire life. I have a few degrees from WITC. I've been a student here on and off for many, many years. I've worked at Essential Health for 34 years as a medical assistant. My husband and I have farmed basically all of our life, but since we've been married for 35 years, or 36 years, we've always farmed. I developed a business, a catering business that was an offshoot of my farming, so that I could, make money on the beef that we were raising. That's called candlelight catering, and I've been doing that for several years. I have children who grew up here and graduated from Ashland. We live in Mason, but my kids went to Ashland. That's where they graduated from. And both of our kids have had to leave the area because there were no jobs here for them, just typical, it's just kind of the way it is these days. And my husband and I are both union representatives. He is a teamster, and I am a steel worker. And so, we see that side of the economic conditions in the area also. So I thought your speech was awesome. Very depressing though. But it's all things that, we all know, and we see it, we live it. And so I thank you for coming up here and giving it to us. Would you take the mic if you want, or?
Improving wages is definitely something that's a priority for us because we don't make very much money in what we do. Like we're talking about, there have been years recently, like last year, just to be very personal, where I have earned less than that, and our company lost money. And other years we do better. And I think a lot of the trouble that maybe people have with business people like myself might be because when the getting is good, we do get it first usually, and we do get more of it that year.
We can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll talk louder.
Sure wait.
So, where was I? I think what stood out to me the most was the discussion about policies because somebody like myself, I'm not terribly educated, but I do. You think about economic policy, and we don't want that. We don't like people telling us what to do. It's why we're in business. And to think that democratic process is going to start telling us that what we need to pay people, of course, is something that's always going to receive a lot of combat flack. Whoa. I kind of want to touch on what this gentleman who's sitting behind you brought up during your talk. Hopefully I got the idea. To say that scheduling and wages are completely in the employer's hands, while I understand the point, I think to say that you also have to respect the fact that we are responding to a change in how our business and our industry works as retailers. We have a retail store downtown. That's why I know I didn't pay extra attention. And I'd like to remind everybody who is interested in setting policies that will assist in the raising of everybody's wages to remember that a lot of times what will sting a big corporation and have massive impact with massive amounts of money will gut punch a Main Street business. And I don't want to say we don't get considered, and I don't want anyone feeling sorry for us, but that's not something people talk about a lot. We talk about Walmart and how they don't treat their employees right, or they don't pay them enough, and they got to work terrible hours, and you're absolutely right. Retail is very much like a factory floor. And if you can arrange for on-demand labor and force that upon people to respond to, you're responding to a squeezed margin. You're going to take advantage of that to the very best that you can until you start losing people. You're going to find out exactly how far you can push people. You have to do that. And along the same line of scheduling, well, we close at 6 o'clock. Somebody comes in at 6:30. Well, we're not there. I was going to buy this from you, but you guys aren't open until 9 o'clock. Well, you might have been the only customer who said, well, it doesn't matter. We were not there for them. We lost the sale. That's a lost opportunity for us to try to oh man, I didn't want to make this all, I didn't want to make an example out of ourselves. But I guess my point is, when we are talking about policies, that's something that I heard, and I do want people to consider along the lines that you were saying later, which I really liked, which was about keeping dollars local and how absolutely critical it is. Well, it goes along the same lines of policies. You cannot set a policy that requires the Main Street businesses to just increase wages or just make improvements, very specific ones or very direct ones, without having some real problems. People just, well, that's it. There's no more money. We're done. So anyway, that's all I have to say about that.
Can I say something? My brother's up from Fox Point this week, and I was taking him through town, showing him the things, the changes. And we went past Homer Nelson, and he said, "Oh my God, I thought all the Radio Shacks had closed." I said, "Not ours." Down there either. There's nothing. And that's what he thought. It was advertising for all the Radio Shacks.
Well, I'm glad you brought him by and showed him otherwise.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even know you knew that they were closed. No, because I didn't know. Yeah.
You should have taken a shot.
Just went by.
At this point, we'll settle for recognition.
Well, oh my goodness, I mean, you're talking about what I do for a living and what do I think about Laura's talk, and good grief, we could fill up another 40 minutes. But from my perspective, one of the things that I was really asked to come speak to you about, and I'll add a couple other things on too, but the WIB, so the Workforce Investment Board. I will clarify, if you're familiar with Northwest SEP, that's our retail storefront. So we're behind the scenes, we contract with them to deliver services. So if that helps you kind of understand who we are and what we do. But the WIB contracted with UW Superior and in conjunction with Vision's Northwest Economic Development Group to do a skills gap study last year. And for our purposes, we have the 10 Northwestern counties, so it was a 10 county-wide skills gap study. And they ended up surveying 2,000 businesses and then 1,000 employees, because they wanted to kind of get a sense for what workers thought about the skills gap concept. For my purposes, when I'm talking about skills gap, I'm talking about the gap between the hard skills necessary to do a job effectively and the skills that the worker has. So to give you a little bit of background, UW Superior used the Department of Labor's KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities identified for various different occupations. The very basic things all the way to the more advanced things that someone must have to be successful in a position. And what the whole thing, a lot of things came out of the skills gap, but the biggest thing that I can tell you that we seem to find is that the employers were identifying a gap in soft skills. So the ability to, well, A, show up to work, those kinds of things. Participate as part of a team, problem solve, have critical thinking skills. The employees saw themselves as having hard skill deficiencies and assumed that pursuing education, credentialing, continuing education, something along those lines, would bring them up to par and then qualify them for a higher wage or position within the company. And so that was an interesting aha moment in that the workers who weren't particularly easy to work with or weren't good team members of an employer thought that they maybe deserved something because they had paper certificates, but in reality, they were missing skills that needed far more work than what a paper certificate from somewhere was going to solve. So that was really kind of the big aha moment that came out of that, and that you have more traditional thinkers and thinking, because I have education, I deserve this. Whereas employers were saying, it's okay if they don't have all of the education, we can help fill in the blanks, but they have to show up to work on time, be able to work as part of a team, have critical thinking skills. So that was kind of, it almost became a soft skills gap study in terms of what was there. And so we actually have quite a laundry list of the skills that were identified that are lacking in most of the working population, as identified by the employers. So that was an interesting piece. I do have, the skills gap is available on our website. I have cards. You're welcome to go download it. I wouldn't print it, but I would read it online. So, and then I just kind of wanted to mention a couple of other things. I was talking with Laura before we got going, and we were talking about data and data and data. Oh my gosh, there's so much data. And I ran the numbers for Ashland and Bayfield County. The median wage for the state of Wisconsin is $17.38. In Ashland and Bayfield counties, it's $14.12. So in the work that I do, we are tasked with serving the most barriered individuals in the system. So people who are either dislocated or laid off from their jobs, people who are impoverished, people who have drug and alcohol and substance abuse issues, people who just never had somebody show them that they're supposed to go to work. And so we work with that population. So that's its own challenge. So when we can get them an $11.55 an hour job, we're like, woohoo, this is great, because at least they're on a career pathway. But on the flip side, we're also working with spousal placement for professionals coming into the region. We get that a lot. We're working really heavily with the retail industry, the sustainable ag food system industry right now, and the healthcare industry, because all three of those are big players for us in terms of where we see jobs coming from in the future. So we're trying to solve problems at all levels. So this was interesting because sometimes we just have to celebrate the small successes, and I'm not saying it's great to get somebody an $11 an hour job, but somebody's got to work in those jobs too. And if we can take someone who's not working, get them skilled up, and at least get them working, the idea is they'll move through a career pathway defined either with schooling and actual curriculum, or they're just going to keep working their way up, hopefully, if they're good at their positions. So I'm happy to speak with anybody else about anything else, but I think, Laura was dead on. I think the impact of the sustainable foods, particularly in the Chequamegon Bay area, we're doing some really cool grant programs with the tribes right now, trying to increase their production levels at LCO and St. Croix. So there are things that are kind of bubbling up, but again, it comes back to making sure that everybody's working together too, and that nobody's kind of working in silos and in vacuums. So with that, Chaz, I'll give it to you.
Good. I get the bad thing, right? Oh, there we go. Like I said, my name is Charles Connor, and actually everybody calls me Chaz. I have had a lot of experience actually in the gaming industry, 15 years actually, within management and frontline supervisory experience. The one thing that you failed to remark on within your report, how many of those poverty level families are dual working families, meaning both parents are working? So yeah, with where I live, almost everybody I know works, meaning mother and father are both working. So, and that's just to make ends meet. It's really, really sad, but it is the truth. And I know that is a fact actually even up here in Ashland, where almost all the households have dual workers. So, because I live in one. So it's just the way it is. The median wage around here is very, very low. It's a lot lower as you go east of here than as you go west, but it's just a fact of life. You learn to live on what you can get. So, well, what we do have going on right now is then, for what we're starting out there, we are trying to get into the agricultural side of things to try and create more jobs in the community that for Odano on here. But we're also trying to look at further down the road, once we get it going and once we start expanding, who can we also bring in? So we are trying to figure out different ways to bring money in and get more skills for basically anybody in the area. So it's just one of those fun things to do. It's very hard. Like I said, my background is in business, so I enjoy numbers. And numbers really catch me really good. Your poverty numbers that I looked that you had up here, I can tell just by looking at them, almost all those numbers came from the southern part of the state, with nothing from this area up here. Because I work with numbers every day, I know that poverty level for northern Wisconsin is closer to 25-26% for everybody. And then as you break it all, they tend to go higher and higher. So your poverty level's wrong, or your unemployment rate was wrong, I'm sorry, for northern Wisconsin. That I know. But if you've got anything you want to ask him, feel free to ask him. Very good at talking, good at conversing with people, so I just hate being in front of boards like this. So. And I wasn't really prepared on what this was all for. So. But with that, thank you.
I gotta add something to Chaz's point. I know myself, can everybody hear me okay too? I haven't spoken into a microphone for a long time. An interesting economic factor that's very hard to calculate is when an individual or individuals work multiple jobs. I see, because I live full-time in this area, I see a lot of folks who, whether by necessity or they want to work multiple jobs, I see a lot of that in our area, and it's probably true for nationwide. I'm not sure. I definitely don't have a statistic for that, but I know, speaking for myself, like Ted introduced for my introduction, I work in grocery store management, but I also have a lawn care business. And so essentially, if you look at that from a numbers standpoint, I'm not trying to focus on myself, I'm just using myself as an example. I'm an individual using up 2 American jobs. And so if you multiply that by, like I said, at least in this area, what I can see, that happens a lot. And so if that's a negative or positive aspect, I guess there's pros and cons to both, of that. But I think that number would be very hard to quantify for some individuals. Say I have a buddy of mine who works for a manufacturing company, and then in the evenings or on the weekends he helps buddy roof, So an individual like that would be hard to collect in data, because a lot of times, something like that. The point that I really wanted to discuss when I got up here was that I think I think I'm a nerd for how fascinating the world of economics is. But I think since we're all in this room tonight, I think we're all on the same page thinking about economics. Okay, but the main focus that I've actually thought about for a long time, with whether it be a microeconomy, macroeconomy, state's economy, nation's economy, the world economy, is like some of the points we talked about here earlier, where whether by design or just, I don't know, maybe it's part of human nature in regards to points such as we need to be more efficient, reduce waste, and points like that. But when you look at those aspects in an economic standpoint, and you analyze and analyze and analyze, you see, I see like laundry lists of pros and cons. Okay, so in our area, I pay attention to it. The forest industry in our area. I've always been fascinated and interested in the forest industry, and my family does have a little bit of history in the forest industry as well as logging, so I think it's just in my genes to care about it. My point with bringing up the forest industry and farming and things like that is, for example, I'd like to use the Bayfront power plant here in Ashland. for multiple standpoints, if we want to look at the pros and cons as an example, the power plant here in town is, we see, well, as a negative, okay, we say, well, that power plant is consuming forest products, and, that's sometimes not healthy for the environment. That's very true. However, the pro that we would talk about is the jobs that this area has because of that power plant. Not just jobs at the plant, but all the jobs that step down the ladder because of that. I guess before I talk any further about that, is everyone fairly familiar with the Bayfield power plant here in Ashland?
Sure.
They burn primarily forest product, wood chips, bark, things like that. And a friend of mine told me the numbers on what that Bayfield power plant brings in, like tons of, or like as far as weight per year. And if I recall correctly, I don't want to be quoted on this, don't put me in the newspaper on this, but it was around 300-some thousand tons per year. Okay, so we see the pros and cons of that. Now, if we take that example and look at that in a world economy standpoint, where we're thinking about reducing waste or being more efficient, I'm always thinking about that. A lot of people are, but we also have to consider the cons to reducing and being more efficient. I know Laura touched on that towards the end of her presentation, which was really good at talking about the ultimate most important thing is quality of life. And we do have a very good quality of life, but we always need to strive higher. For me to bring a little more clarity to the point of where I want to go with describing this concept of reducing waste and efficiency. I've lived in Wisconsin, in this whole area, my whole life, 28 years. And like I said, I've been around the forest industry. And we've seen a lot of it go, right? And so there's pros and cons to that, right? Well, we could sit here all night and say, well, why did it go? Where did it go? What happened? Well, some things went overseas. Some things dried up completely. Some corporate policies ultimately determined the fate of many things as well. But I don't know, it's kind of you have to look and think about it in a wheel of the sky type of standpoint where, you have to have this one thing to have this next thing. And the gentleman with the Wisconsin sweatshirt brought up a very good point earlier, that's actually what I thought about this whole forestry example, was because take some of the towns here up and down Highway 13, say Ashland, Park Falls, Phillips, and Wisconsin Rapids have been very negatively impacted by changes in forest economy. And so with those negative impacts, then we do see fewer people that, can say, when we touched on a slide earlier about, folks who used to, maybe they used to build more frequent a dinner club or a restaurant. Maybe they'd go up to Duluth more often and buy a pair of jeans or something. And now you've seen the squeeze put on, kind of spun off from things like that, not just in the forest industry, but other areas as well. And I think we always have to continue to be very, very in-depth thinking about policies and decision making, because a lot of times we'll make a decision based on a lot of good criteria, but we also have to think about the negative impacts that kind of subtle areas that are looked over at times. So that's kind of where I wanted to go with that tonight. Thanks for your time.
Okay, we'd like to open it up now for, I'll have to speak without a mic, I think I can speak loud enough. Open it up for questions. Laura, we can put a 5th chair for you here, for 6th chair too. So we're going to match back over there. But yeah, okay, question over the left here, or left.
Or anyone, but in particular the speaker, what do you see the impact of a $15 an hour minimum wage will do?
Well, the 15 will happen first in, I'm not sure. So, many of you probably know that in the past week, New York and California both extended $15 an hour minimum wages. At least the current count is that I think some 17 million workers will be covered by minimum wage increases that have been part of this nationwide movement towards 15. 10 million of those workers will be in those $15 an hour states. Obviously, New York and California, especially the urban areas in New York and California, $15 is a very different number than 15 here, right? Where Mark's number was that the median wage is below $15 an hour, right? It makes an enormous difference whether you're talking about Seattle and LA or a small town, even Fresno. But what the early evidence is, I think, in those contexts where there are long horizons and higher minimums already, so it's worth remembering that both New York and California are moving up from close to 10 already, right? So our minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, and it applies in 20-some states now, is $7.25 an hour, but many states are well above that floor, not Wisconsin, but many states. So California and LA are moving from 10 to 15 on a pretty, California and New York, on a pretty long timeline. I think the evidence from Seattle, which was the fastest and first to move to 15, has been that even the restaurant industry, which was, looking forward, quite concerned both about prices in the industry and employment effects in the industry. The first 2 years of data on that suggest that actually the restaurant industry is bigger today in Seattle, et cetera. So they have survived that transition. I think there's a lot more transition to go on, and it will hit cities that are much less high cost of living places, and that will change the dynamics some. But at least the first studies are reassuring on that. But let me say, if this isn't clear, I don't believe we could flip tomorrow to $15 an hour in the state of Wisconsin and not see impacts, right? I think its context is really important in in California and Seattle and New York, where the 15 moves are. I do think there is room to move on the minimum wage, but I wouldn't say you can go from 7.25 to 15, in a day.
This is for Lori again. When you talk about long-term wage stagnation presentation, could you share with us how we compare to our surrounding states on wage stagnation?
Sure. That's a pretty consistent national picture. I would say Wisconsin's median wage trend deviates a little in the 1980s, in that the 80s were slightly more brutal in Wisconsin. The manufacturing restructuring in Wisconsin in the 1980s meant that wages went in the late 70s from above the national average to below the national average across the 1980s. They came back up both at the national and in the state, but with the state behind the national in the late 80s and on into the 90s. The late 90s are relatively good for Wisconsin. Wisconsin closes that gap again in the late 90s with the national. And then this whole 15 years of the new century, Wisconsin is just running basically at the national. If you look at specific states, over that same period, You could, depending on the state you pick, you can get quite a different picture. Not surprisingly, you pick Michigan. Wisconsin looks relatively good, right? You pick a state where manufacturing fell apart, and especially any auto state, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, you see wage collapse that begins in the 80s, that looks a lot like Wisconsin across the 80s, improves a little in the 90s, and then the whole new century is devastating except for the last 5 years for the auto states. So they look much worse. You look at Minnesota, we start the early 70s pretty much like Minnesota. You see a big divergence as the Minnesota median wage moves forward on a more diverse industrial base, healthier, the Twin Cities are healthier, and it's 3M, and it's in Northwest Airlines, and or the Mall of America. Nobody knows exactly why, but it's a different trajectory in the state of Wisconsin. In the state of Minnesota, slightly more healthy, but that's a little bit of the comparative view.
I'm just reading his book by Thomas Frank, Listen Liberal. I've probably heard that. It's a very depressing book.
I don't know how to party here.
But I just wanted to read something out of here. It says, economies aren't ecosystems. They aren't naturally occurring phenomena to which we must learn to acclimate. Their rules are made by humans. And I'm sort of wondering if maybe the issue is not growth, but fairness of rules in the economy. And right now the rules are bent towards the super rich who are taking it all home. And ordinary people are not, we're not playing by the same rules. I don't know. Anybody else?
Yeah, hot topic. I would definitely like to add that I agree with that and correlate that with the $15 an hour wage issue. So everyone, has a viewpoint, and there's a lot of consensus with it. I know that $15 an hour would be a great thing. There's a lot of families that need that. And as far as the rule goes with economies, I know one of the worries I have, and it's a sad worry, but a worry I have is, say take big companies, for example, that employ people for low wages. I fear that some companies would do the wrong thing and leave. And then the people that have the jobs may wind up in a worse position than, what they have. That's not what I want. I want good conditions for everyone. I want the $15 an hour minimum. But I'm afraid that the powerful will, like in the book, could possibly just go around the rule and make it worse. That's my biggest fear.
He points out, like NAFTA and all these things like that, that's a rule. And the rule has resulted in all these companies going elsewhere.
Yeah.
That's not a standard rule. It's not natural. It's just a rule.
Right.
He points out that Mr. Walton, one of the Waltons from Walmart, makes more money than all of the minimum wage workers in America combined.
Yeah.
And, that's an example of the rule that I think is totally, it's crazy.
I can change that.
Yeah.
I have a question for Laura. So some businesses will be in one state and they don't get what they want, they head off to another state. Is there ever any discussion about nationalizing some of these labor issues so that the United States isn't pitting state from state and the country actually works together instead of against each other?
It's a long, and I mean, it relates to even the NAFTA rules, you know, the flows of capital. I mean, in a way, what we try and do is solve the whole thing through a minimum wage increase, right? When we have a context of flows of capital and, you know, corporate decision-making and even, you know, regulatory law in every other direction sort of lets everything go, and then we say, oh, let's increase the minimum wage. So I believe, you know, I think that sense that the economy is not an invisible hand created. It didn't live before we got here. You know, we created the rules of this economy, and we can change the rules of the economy. I think that's an important point. But and so, yes, there has been a lot of work in trying to, some people call it ending the economic war between the states. The economic war between the states is mostly relevant in manufacturing, right? People who can get up and move and then ship their goods somewhere. The service sector is much less mobile. And so, you know, just inherently. And so I think that the biggest frontiers on ending the economic war between the states, and this is, you know, the bidding for BMW or who gets the Boeing, and it's generally production facilities, and communities will, you know, give away the store, right, to land a big plant. And a community that used to have 1 or 2 big plants, you know, all they want, right, is that kind of job base again. Decent union jobs, you know, that promise is kind of, you know, it's like it's the silver bullet. So there have been attempts to keep states and even local units of government from fighting and creating, you know, ever more rich giveaways to corporations. It's been almost impossible to defang it because the payoff to landing someone is so huge. And I would say it has become a little less important over time as the manufacturing sector has become less important in the entire national economy. One thing in terms of value-added, U.S. manufacturing makes more value today than it did in the year 2000 or in the past. But in the state of Wisconsin, for example, we have 3 manufacturing workers today for every 4 that we had in 2015, in the year 2000. So yes, manufacturing has grown a little bit over the last 5 years, but it shrunk enormously from the year 2000. And it is even that growth is pretty constrained. Anyway, so as manufacturing is a smaller share of what the economic development game is, this fight between the states changes a little bit.
But the point I'm trying to also make is that the kickbacks went to the entire United States instead of just to that one little area, then it's not a winner and a loser.
Yeah, I mean, and actually, I think in economic policy, the danger and the moment that we sit in right now is, right, New York and California couldn't look much more different than Wisconsin, right? And we are moving away from the capacity to do national deals, not towards it, because of, I think, intense polarization. So, you know, I think I wouldn't be super optimistic about the ability to move national policy on that kind of issue.
You mentioned Minnesota, and I heard some economists talking about what they did as a state 10 or 15 years ago, visioning where they thought the industry or growth or economic development could come. So they put their money into education and into minority. I mean, they made state programs that encouraged that because this is where they wanted to go, clean industry, whatever. And the payoff is going to be 10 years down the line to make the investment and have the growth. So is there a way to vision where we want, is there a path to vision where we want to go? Because that's what our local communities are doing. We're trying to figure out how to be local, take care of ourselves, whatever. But can it be on a larger path, and is it possible to start that kind of movement to really look at where Wisconsin wants to be rather than say
know if there's a way, but I want to add on to your comment because I think it's interesting. Do you remember Terry Ludeman? So there used to be a state economist, his name was Terry Ludeman, and he was really engaging, and he always would speak about the planning that Minnesota did, but also how hard it is to compare the economies of Minnesota and Wisconsin's for one reason. Minnesota chose to put all their eggs in the Twin Cities basket. So politically and economically, everything is centered there. If you look at their second largest metropolitan area, it's Duluth. If you look at Wisconsin, you've got Milwaukee fighting Madison, fighting Fox Valley, fighting Eau Claire, fighting La Crosse, fighting Port Wausau, fighting, and so you have all of these medium-sized cities trying to fight the larger cities, and everybody's trying to get their share, whereas in Minnesota, literally what goes to the Twin Cities goes Minnesota. I mean, it's a little bit different kind of structure, and I always thought it was so interesting that he structured it in that way. So I don't know if Wisconsin can go that way because you have all of these fractioned economies already fighting each other, not only for business, but for, and this is the one thing that we haven't talked about tonight, Wisconsin is old, and we up here are really old, and we don't have any workers anyways, and so nobody wants to come here because we don't have anybody to employ. And so that's kind of the missing piece of this, is that, look around, this is a pretty representative room of Ashland and Bayfield County. I mean, and so we haven't even touched on the demographics piece of what that means. When you're talking about $15 an hour minimum wage, and you have Aldi's in Superior paying $16 an hour starting out because they had to fight to get anyone in Superior. So I mean, there's all of these kind of different micro things that are happening, but I don't know that Wisconsin could, because Minnesota draws young people to the Twin Cities, and they kind of have this forever growing economy in the Twin Cities, whereas Wisconsin looks a little differently.
So, Mary, in your earlier statement, when you were talking about the soft skills gap, a lot of the money from the state is going toward hard skills development, and how can we, because part of it's an educated workforce can grow the economy also in the area, but we're missing in soft skills in this region, because that's the region you're representing. How can we, can we redirect some of the state monies that are going toward, technical skills, and say, by the way, people need to learn how to go to work, have critical thinking skills and those things. Is there any shift or recognition of the data you have?
To some degree, and I can speak, I mean, as well as I do, WITC has started putting essential employability skills into some of your curriculums to try to develop some of those soft skills. But I think that, this is again where you kind of follow the breadcrumbs back. It goes back to the impoverished families, and then you have two parents working, and then you have youth maybe who aren't necessarily being raised in families where they're learning some of the things that they need to be successful. And it's not the case in every family, but so it kind of goes all the way, you can bring it all the way back to early childhood education. And when I do go to national conferences, it always ends up back at early childhood education. So it is kind of this massive problem that you can try to hit from all these directions, but I don't know that there is a simple, easy solution until we can start to bring some people out of these poverty levels and address some of the issues that we're finding with families.
Yeah, way in the back.
This is for Laura. I was just wondering, from the policy standpoint, listening to this discussion, I'm thinking maybe the $15 an hour minimum wage fight is futile.
We'd like to hear you
Speak up, please.
Okay, I'm getting to my point.
Can't hear you.
I know. What are some of the key policies that you would recommend at the national state level? Maybe universal basic income would get at this and really dig into that big gap in productivity and wages. And, from your concluding point, I think we do need to be working less. In terms of well-being, probably a lot of that productivity from a professional standpoint is in people working more than 40 hours a week and not getting compensated for it.
Yeah, I mean, you can see this in other countries even. Sweden is moving towards a 36-hour work week. France moved long ago to a 35-hour work week. One of the things that happened for most of the 20th century was that as incomes went up, work hours went down. And that's just not true in the US for a number of reasons. And I think it really is interesting on this panel, we start and end with people who have like 700 jobs, each of you.
Yeah, I have one of mine.
You forgot one of your jobs, right? Like it's, you know, you're piecing together jobs to make ends meet. And the US story is one of increasing work, especially because women came into the labor market. And the state of Wisconsin has the highest, the 5th highest women's labor force participation rate in the nation, right? The women of Wisconsin really do work. And I've never really quite, I've tried to figure out exactly what that is, why. There's a kind of farm income replacement story that some people run, but that, it looks bigger than that. Anyway, we're 10% above the national rate of women's work even. So yes, there is a real issue of hours in the US and a real issue of people's kind of always pursuing extra jobs and extra income instead of extra leisure. And I don't know what the answer to that is. There's also these kind of far off conversations on universal basic income. You know, if the robots are going to come and take our jobs by being more efficient than we are at our jobs, that means we'll have a lot of, you know, if the robots are more efficient, then that will create value, right? And so we could turn that into universal basic income if we spread it around. My sense is universal basic income is a conversation that's very hard to get going in Europe, and anything you can't do in Europe, you can't do in the US. So, but it is interesting to watch because the people of Silicon Valley love that one, and they are kind of more central to fancy policy talk in this nation than they used to be. And so maybe you certainly, reading things, will see more about universal basic income, and eventually maybe that will become part of the answer. And then I think it's an interesting question about whether we're going to have this continued bifurcation where local solutions go on in blue versus red states, driving this greater inequality in what is demanded of the labor market, what is supplied outside of the labor market in terms of healthcare or other social supports. I think those things have been going apart, and the more they go apart, the more you end up with a kind of a set of places where people have 700 jobs, none of them paying very well, and a set of places that have taken a different route. And I don't know where that lands, but so you just made me come up randomly talk, not really answer.
I have kind of a combination question, comment, and even something of a challenge. I always think of economics as a personal issue, and I think most of us do, right? My history is different from many of the people in this room. I lived in the poverty class as a child and moved into the middle class. When I was young, the upward mobility rates in this country were 25%. 1 in 4 people climbed out of poverty like I did. The number now is 1 in 10%. So whenever we talk about anything to do with economics or employment or growth or any of these issues, one of the things I just hate to say is, you're dealing with people in poverty. That isn't just their socioeconomic bracket, that's their culture. And that culture isn't always shown a great deal of respect or admiration, or even given the time of day. And when I went into the workforce, and I worked in the Twin Cities, first as an insurance underwriter, later as a software tester, hardly anyone I worked with knew someone who lived in poverty. They knew nothing about poverty, and sadly, many times, they had a lot of very negative ideas about poverty and who the poor were, and what the poor were capable of. And so my words to you, because you're leaders, you're people who speak, you're people who talk to other people, is we have to stop doing that. We have to, because I'm not special, I'm not unique, I'm lucky, I climbed out of poverty. And to tell you the truth, to this very day, sometimes I look at what middle class people do and I just go, you're nuts. It's not how I was brought up. I don't really understand it. I adapted to it. And so this also comes to your soft skills thing. I knew how to get to work on time. I knew, how to say yes or no, sir, yes, please, thank you. I knew that stuff. My differences were far more subtle than that. And they did make a difference. Beginning with, what was I going to major in school? What school was I going to go to? Who were going to be my mentors? Actually, I never had any, because I didn't know how to do that. It was an alien concept. So, I'm just suggesting that is really central to all of this, but I think it's a lot deeper and wider than people often assume when they start talking about this. And I know I'm a lucky person. I've had a good life. I had a good career. But, there were so many things I didn't do and so many chances I missed because I just didn't have any idea how the game was played. And it was just that simple.
Yeah.
I just want to say, thank the panel for coming up there and being here tonight. But, and everything that was said is very important. But what hasn't been mentioned tonight at all is health insurance. I don't care how much money you're going to make, but if you don't have health care coverage, and if they do away with the Affordable Care Act, $15 an hour on care, $20 an hour, whatever, you don't have good health insurance. It doesn't matter what you're going to make. And none of that has ever been even brought up.
In regards to healthcare, I know the position I currently have right now, if I want healthcare coverage, I gotta pay a premium on it every month in order to keep it. A lot of businesses I know don't like paying health insurance or having their employees covered just because of the high cost of it. Like I said, I deal with numbers a lot in my current position I am. And right now, in the past 3 years, we've flipped 4 different insurance companies just due to health costs and what it was costing us to maintain that coverage for employees. Just for instance, a single person coming in being paid, and if they're an employee, as long as they're working, they're covered under health care and they get the insurance. The cost to us just for that one employee by themselves was just over $10,000 for that employee. If they got one child with them, that amount that we pay goes from just over $10,000 to just under $20,000.
Right.
If they're married with one kid, they're already talking $24,000. That's just for health coverage. Okay, so as employers, when they're looking at that kind of health coverage as a fringe benefit, that's a very big bite in what they can do. So.
I understand that. I'm talking nationally. Nobody talks about the health care, the high cost of health care in this country. Nobody addresses it. You don't see any of the politicians addressing any of that.
Bernie. Yeah, Roger, last question.
A couple of things I want to mention. This fellow talked about the rules and also the minimum wage. I think you mentioned, Mr. Dresser, the local economy, building your local economy. And I think that can be done, and I look at locally as a state as well as just a city or a county. In addressing minimum wage, we have something on the federal level that I think can be used as a model, and that's the Davis-Bacon Federal Prevailing Wage Act, which applies to the trades, i.e. plumbers, steam fitters, carpenters, electricians, when they're working on projects that receive federal funding. And that Davis-Bacon Wage Rate Act doesn't say that there is one wage that applies to those trades throughout the United States, but it says those are the prevailing wages. It'll apply to the prevailing wages not only in a particular state, but in districts within that state. So in Wisconsin, the prevailing wage rates for the trades is less than the prevailing wage rates for the trades in southern Wisconsin, based on some of the things we talked about earlier, the economy of Madison and Dane County with what about a 3% unemployment rate compared to the economy here in northern Wisconsin. So I think if the state were to say develop a similar model with an inflated to adjusted to inflation on a yearly basis, I think that could respond to a minimum wage without trying to apply a $15 or whatever wage throughout the entire United States, which isn't very reasonable or very practical. And give you an example. In Madison, an apartment maybe median $900 a month. In Ashland, median $600 a month. Well, that $900 a month apartment dweller would say to the employer who needs to hire somebody, employer, I need $15 an hour to be able to even afford to live in a city, where the person in Ashland can say, I need $12, $13 an hour to be able to live here and work. So I think that's a model that might be able to be developed statewide based on Davis-Bacon. And then, the fellow that just left, he talked about the rules. I think one of the federal rules, and there's such a contradiction in what the federal government does, one of the rules that I think led to the circa 2002 technology recession and the circa 2008 more larger housing recession, of which we still see feelings on that, was the repeal of Glass-Steagall, which allowed the commercial and the central banks to get involved in the securities business and underwriting. And so they did. And loans were made to subprime lenders, packaged, sold out to the investors. Those loans weren't paid, and boom, the investor was out money. And that was a result, I think, of Glass-Steagall. Now the other, and that's why I think that should be reinstated. And the other part that he talked about.
We're gonna have to end this now, just because we're after 9 o'clock and we've got two other things to go. We want to.
Well, then, the fellow from Nelson, can I speak with you later, because you said something very important that I think we should more fully discuss.
Sure.
Okay,
Sure.
It's 9 o'clock. I want to thank all of you for coming. I especially want to thank the panel for participating in what is a very difficult question to answer. I would like to invite all of you to, if you have further questions, take those yellow sticky things, put them on the whiteboard, we'll type them up. This is not the end of our discussion here. This is only the first of the discussions. June 22nd, we're going to have Northland College's Center for Rural Communities host another forum, and we're bringing in a woman named Sarah McKinley from the Democracy Collaborative in Washington, D.C., who's been a co-author of a report on community wealth building, so that she can just share with us what she's heard going on around the country. And we can all come together again and listen to what ideas she wants to present and think how we can compare our own situation. Before we close tonight, though, I have a very special request from all the people who are members of the Bayfield Electric Co-op. We have a very exciting way to start keeping our dollars whole, instead of sending them out to Minneapolis or wherever. And so I would like to invite Bill Bailey and Gail Chatfield just to spend 2 minutes explaining to you the community solar farm. Not the whole business, you can talk to them later, but I think they would like to point you to, if you are interested in reducing your carbon footprint, how you might be able to do it. The other thing I wanted to just suggest to people is that if you want to participate at all in study that we're doing. Please talk to myself or Jan Penn afterward, and we can let you know when the next meetings are. So thank you all. Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you all, panelists. This has been very, very